I've been sick for like a month. Apparently you can get the flu and then you can get better, and then you can get a post-flu cough that just sticks with you until you eventually get better. I went to the doctor and he just shrugged and said it will go away eventually. I have wanted to make some form of video, but I have had no voice like half the time, and even now I sound awful. So I'm filled with rage, and my rage has been targeted towards studying all the diseases we have killed. So this will be a brief history and description of all the diseases we have eradicated or are going to eradicate. The first disease we killed was smallpox. The eradication of smallpox is directly tied to the creation of its vaccine by Edward Jenner. At the time, there was this trope of the fair milkmaid. Basically, everyone thought milkmaids were really sexy, and no one could figure out why. A few people like Edward were intellectuals and realized milkmaids are sexy because they don't have smallpox scars, and that must be because they got cowpox. Cowpox is like less dangerous smallpox, but you get it from cows. Edward realized this and then eventually took cowpox pus from people and put it in other people, and those other people became immune to smallpox. And that was the start of vaccination. The eradication of smallpox started in the 1950s after World War II. Smallpox had already been locally eradicated in a lot of wealthy countries. Places like the United States, USSR, and most of Europe, they were fine. They could produce a lot of vaccine on their own. And following World War II, with the invention of the World Health Organization, things like that, there was a lot more cooperation. And while everyone on Earth tends to hate each other, they can usually agree on one thing: their mutual hatred of smallpox. No longer having to focus on their own populations, the United States and USSR started producing huge amounts of the vaccines and just flooding third world countries with them. The combination of the number of vaccines and the amount of money being thrown at the problem meant that by the 1970s, smallpox was gone. As it turns out, true cooperation can only be achieved when everyone hates one thing enough. The second ever disease to get eradicated was called Rinderpest. It did not affect humans at all, but it infects animals. And that's not great, because one of the main things it affected is cattle, which, are typically people's livelihoods. If you have a bunch of cows and they all die, you're in for a bad time. Rinderpest eradication was much less of a world effort and much more individual. Individual countries would want to eradicate it because it negatively affected the economy, and that just kind of ballooned out until by the 50s, everyone was just kind of trying to get rid of it in their own way. And it just kind of ballooned from there. Everyone was vaccinating cattle and wild animals where applicable, and slowly but surely they chipped away at it until the last case happened in 2001. And now Rinderpest is gone. And apparently wildebeest are back in the Serengeti because it killed most of them in the first place. Now, those are the two diseases that have actually been fully eradicated. But there are several that are right there. They're on death's door. And this is the second reason why I made this, is because the recent death of former US President Jimmy Carter brought to light his efforts in helping almost eradicate a disease. Carter and his charitable organization, the Carter Foundation, are the ones who spearheaded the eradication of a disease called guineaworm. Guineaworm is caused by the titular guineaworm. It's a disease caused by drinking water infected with guineaworm larvae, who then go into your intestines to do the parasite things for a little bit and then breed. The females, after breeding, then go down to your leg, form a painful blister, and then come out of the blister over the course of days or weeks. It is extremely painful and you can't speed up the process. If you try to pull out the worm, it will break in half and die, and then you'll get an infection. The only way to really soothe the burning pain is to dip your foot in water, which is what the worm wants you to do. The second the host tries to stop the pain with water, it releases more larvae in that water, and then someone else will drink that water and ingest the worm, and then boom, another person's infected. Due to the unique life cycle of the guineaworm, the easiest ways to fight it are to filter water, or just to know, don't dip the worm in water so it releases larvae. You can't vaccinate against a literal worm, but you can spread the knowledge required to make sure those worms never actually reproduce properly. And this knowledge spreading has worked. When they started their work in the 80s, there were over 3 million cases a year. In 2024, there were 7 cases worldwide. Current eradication is set to be done by 2027, with it being confirmed by 2030. You did a good thing, Jimmy. Great job. The next closest disease to being eradicated is probably polio. This has been mainly due to mass vaccination once again. Polio, as I'm sure you're all aware, is the disease that when it goes bad, you go paralyzed. Not a good time. Mass vaccination of especially infants and children has meant that polio for the most part has been eradicated from most of the world. It followed a similar trajectory as a lot of these, where rich countries that can afford to mass produce vaccines get rid of it first, and then it slowly trickles down to everywhere else. Natural polio cases are still endemic to Pakistan and Afghanistan, while vaccine-derived strains keep popping up in a few other countries. Basically, the polio vaccine uses an alive but weakened strain of the virus, and what ends up happening is the person who's given the vaccine is almost always fine, but they might accidentally spread it to someone who isn't immune. And then the polio mutates to be deadly again, and then we get where we were. It's a weird catch-22 where vaccines eradicated almost all of polio, but the majority of modern cases are now caused from the vaccine spreading it again. Another disease that's well on its way to being eradicated is Yaws. Yaws is another skin condition that makes you all bumpy. That seems to be a running thing with these. The near eradication of Yaws is almost entirely due to the widespread of antibiotics, because Yaws is a bacteria. But that also is the reason why it hasn't been eradicated yet, because every time we have a new breakthrough that speeds up the process of eradicating it, some new strain comes along that is then immune to a new antibiotic. Now don't get alarmed, we're not breeding like a super antibiotic proof version of Yaws. It's just these antibiotic resistant forms show up, and then they put another roadblock in the way. Like, it should have been eradicated 10 years ago, maybe even 20, but these little roadblocks keep slowing everything down and making it worse. Those are the main ones I wanted to talk about. There are a few other diseases that have been locally eradicated in plenty of places, like measles and rubella, but they're not well on their way to being eradicated. All of the diseases I talked about today either have been eradicated, or they're at a point where they are going to be eradicated probably within the next 5 to 10 years. Anyways, thanks for watching. Hopefully my voice gets better soon. I don't like not making videos for a month, but I also don't like sounding like this. We'll just see how it goes. Bye.